A new year and a new U.S. Senator for Arizona, Republican Jeff Flake.
In the House, the rules are really set up to protect the majority. In the Senate, they're set up to protect the individual. And so it's a much different procedure, and I think I like it.
Flake and his colleagues face the same issues that bedeviled the last Congress, including immigration reform.
We're not going to deport them. They're not going to self-deport. We need a reasonable, responsible mechanism to do it. It doesn't have to include amnesty. It shouldn't.
Tonight, getting to know Jeff Flake and an in-depth look at chances for immigration reform. It's Arizona Week.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support. Once again, your moderator, Michael Chiha.
Jeff Flake was sworn in as Arizona's junior senator 3 weeks ago. He spoke with us about his move from the House of Representatives and the issues that he and his colleagues face. We'll start with immigration. What needs to happen in regard to immigration reform in the country?
Well, four big things. One, increased border security. The nice thing in Arizona is we have an example of where it works and kind of an example of what we should have, and that's the Yuma sector of the border, 80-some miles of border. If we can get the Tucson sector to look more like the Yuma sector, then we'll be in good shape on the border side. Then we've got to have a robust temporary worker program going ahead. Future immigration or future labor needs will dictate that. We're going to need additional labor, and that ought to be taken care of with a temporary worker plan. Third, we need interior enforcement, enforcement on the employer side, whether it's E-Verify or something else. We've got to make sure that employers have the tools to know who's working there. Fourth, we've got to have a mechanism to deal with those who are here illegally now, and to recognize that we're not going to deport them. They're not going to self-deport. We need a reasonable, responsible mechanism to do it. It doesn't have to include amnesty. It shouldn't. But we've got to recognize that those who are here aren't going to self-deport.
There are those who say that anything short of full deportation of all illegal immigrants is amnesty.
Yeah.
What would you propose be done about that group of people?
Well, I think the best framework so far is the Strive Act that I introduced with Luis Gutierrez, which says that if you're here illegally and you wish to stay in a temporary worker status, you learn English, you pay back taxes, you jump through a lot of hoops. Anybody who has any criminal record would not be allowed to enter this program. But if they wish later to adjust their status and perhaps go toward citizenship, they would have to wait until everybody who is in the line going through the legal orderly process has gone through it. And then they could petition to adjust their status. That, to me, is what defines amnesty, is whether somebody cuts in line ahead of those who are going through the legal orderly process.
About a year ago, as you were starting your Senate campaign, you said that the political reality in immigration reform was that border security had to come first. Do we have a new political reality now based on the election outcome?
Well, I think Republicans, Democrats, everybody realizes that we need to deal with this for, I think, both substantive and political reasons. On the Republican side, I think there's a political realization that we can't take some of the positions that have been taken in the past. Having said that, the position I took in the campaign is that border security needs to be paramount. I think that it will be and has to be in any solution here. In order to move ahead with some of the items that I talked about in terms of dealing with those who are here illegally, you've got to have better security on the border. The border has changed over the past couple of years as well. Much more cartel activity in terms of human and drug smuggling, and the safety of those who hold property near and on the border has to be taken into account. And I think we can do all that. And like I said, the fact that we have pretty good security in the Yuma sector proves that we can.
Flake is among 8 senators working on a bipartisan plan on immigration reform. How can they get from entrenched positions to solutions? I spoke with Judith Gans, manager of the Immigration Policy Program at the University of Arizona's Udall Center for Studies in Public Policy. Judith Gans, thanks so much for being with me.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
From a policy perspective rather than a political perspective, what needs to happen to get us to immigration reform?
The biggest thing that needs to happen is to bring the legal immigration system into alignment with current economic and demographic realities in the United States. Our current system was put in place in the mid-1960s, and it's fundamentally out of alignment with the current U.S. economy.
And there are a number of specific issues in immigration reform that need to be dealt with, and I'd like to ask you about those one at a time. The first one is border security, which of course a lot of people say has to come first.
Yeah, that's a dilemma because it's understandable that people are concerned about illegal immigration, but illegal immigration needs to be understood as the consequence of this mismatch of legal channels that I was talking about. Right now, the economic incentives and the demographic realities of an aging baby boom population are really overwhelming the legal system, the legal immigration system. So it's actually difficult to secure the border when there's that big a misalignment. So the two, securing the border and reforming the system, really do go hand in hand.
What you're saying is that we need the employment that's coming across the line, whether it's legal or illegal?
That's correct. Illegal immigration is a symptom of the problem. And it is a problem, but the problem is this mismatch of legal channels. We've had significant growth in service sector jobs and in jobs that need young, low-skill workers. Most of the low-skill, and when we talk about low-skill, we mean typically lower educational attainment. Most of the native-born low-skill workers are much older. They're from a time when graduating from high school was a big deal, and young immigrant workers have been coming in illegally because the legal channels don't exist to fill that demand in the economy.
And that leads to the notion of a guest worker program. What looks best from a policy perspective when it comes to that?
The main thing that's important is for Congress to create flexibility in the system. The economy evolves. It's a changing, dynamic thing. And right now, the system is, we do have guest worker programs. There are visas. There are agricultural visas. There are temporary visas for low-skilled workers to work in places like hotels or resorts, ski resorts, that sort of thing. But Congress needs to create probably expanded guest worker programs that are flexible, that can change as the economy evolves.
And is there a need for a permanent worker program of foreigners at the low skill level?
I think that's less straightforward. I think as a public policy question, anytime you create a distinction between workers and citizens, that creates problems in the long run. We do want people to come here to learn English, to become part of our society. But if we're really saying, no, we only want you here to work, and then, by the way, leave when we're done with you, I don't think that's a good dynamic. So I think we do have to balance the flexibility that temporary worker programs give us, but also create more permanent legal channels so that people can come and join our society and become full-fledged members of it.
And then talk about that in relation to what are called the high-skilled workers. Visa programs there have strict limits on them, and a lot of businesses say they're not getting enough of those workers into the country. What changes are needed there?
Again, flexibility, and for the numbers to be able to fluctuate as demand fluctuates. I know one of the real criticisms of our current system is we're educating a lot of high-skilled foreign students in our universities. It's currently very difficult for that knowledge to stay here in the country. People come in on student visas and get engineering degrees or computer science degrees, and then it's actually very difficult and expensive for them to be able to stay as permanent workers. That's something that needs to be fixed.
Now, what happens with the visa system for the families of people who are here legally, whether they're citizens or permanent residents? More fixes needed there?
Yeah, I mean, in 2007, when Senators Kennedy and Kyle proposed a significant change to the immigration system, there was talk at that time of moving to a point-based system, where instead of our current system currently privileges family relationships. If you are a U.S. citizen with close relatives who are foreign nationals, it's relatively easy for those folks to immigrate, regardless of the match of their economic or their sort of skill as workers to the U.S. economy. And the talk at the time was to go to a point system, and there was some concern. Obviously, people who currently have the right to have their family members immigrate didn't want to lose those rights. So there was talk at that point of including family relationships as one of the things that you get points for. But all of this is really up in the air. Congress has a lot of different ways they can structure the system. The most important thing is that it be structured to be in alignment with the current economic realities.
And then the biggest issue on the table, at least politically, and one that Senator Flake referred to, is what to do about the estimated 11 million people in the country now illegally. What's going to happen there, or what should happen there?
That's really the most difficult issue in this whole discussion. That the question of amnesty, as it's been called, is what derailed the 2007 negotiations. And really what's happening is a political debate within the country about what's the appropriate penalty for being in the country illegally. And you know, one side will say, look, they broke our laws, they should be deported, and there should be no mercy shown, if you will. That's at one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, you have people saying, look, we hired them, let it go. They're integrated into societies. Many undocumented immigrants have U.S. citizen children or are married to U.S. citizens. They're embedded in our society. Let's let it go. The answer is going to be somewhere in the middle. We're not going to totally forgive the fact that people are here illegally, but we're also really unlikely to deport it. So we're having this political debate over what the appropriate penalties should be. And once that's settled, then I think we can go on to make the other changes in the system. But so far, that's what has really prevented the needed reforms to the immigration system.
A little over a minute remaining in our time together. And in that time, tell me, as a longtime student of immigration policy in this country, what gives you hope now that this discussion is back on the front burner?
You know, as I've said several times, what a difference an election makes. I think the most recent presidential election and the changes that we saw in the Congress have really changed the dynamic. The role of Hispanic voters in the United States you know, is clearly coming to fruition, if you will, and that has changed the dynamic. I think there's a recognition that politically we can't just keep demonizing immigrants for the fact that our legal system is out of alignment with these economic forces, and really try to step up to solving the problems that are there.
Judith Gans, immigration policy analyst with the Udall Center here at the University of Arizona. Thank you so much for being with me today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Immigration isn't the only big item on the Senate's agenda. Here's more of my interview with Senator Jeff Flake for his views on the federal budget and fiscal matters and gun control legislation. One of your last actions as a member of the House was the vote on the temporary, if we may call it that, fiscal repair, or however you would like to characterize it. I would urge you to do that. And your vote was against the package that came through. Could you explain that?
It was. I felt that we have to include some spending cuts at some point. I'm not a fan of the sequester. I didn't vote for the Budget Control Act that brought it about, you know, a year and a half ago. But we've got to cut somewhere. And if we're not going to do the sequester, we've got to find out where we are going to cut. It just was unbelievable that we could address the fiscal cliff. The cliff is there because of our massive debt and deficit, and actually pass a bill that increases spending and just kicks the spending cuts can down the road again. I just couldn't be a part of that.
It's not too far down the road, though. Just a month or two before Congress has to act on it because of the sequester was given a 2-month delay. What do you see being a part of that? What's the solution?
Well, the solution is to cut spending. You know, the president has made it clear he wants to shake the revenue tree once again. That only goes so far. We've already had some tax increases, and I think it's time to cut spending now. So, like I said, I thought that the sequester, I still believe that it hits far too hard on defense rather than some other areas. But we've got to cut. And in the House, we have a pretty good blueprint. The Ryan budget was a good blueprint. You've got the Erskine-Bowles, the Simpson-Bowles, you know, framework that we can use. There are a lot of things that we can do. We just got to have the courage to do it.
Should there be any defense cuts?
Yes, yes. There are some defense cuts undergoing that are ongoing right now, but we need to do more than that. If anybody who says that in a $700 billion defense budget that there's no room for additional savings isn't looking hard enough. Having said that, the sequester goes far too far, and we need to find the right approach and take it. But we've got to cut every area, believe me. When you're borrowing 40 cents on every dollar, more cuts need to be made.
Medicare and Social Security, where do they fit in?
Oh, that's the real drivers of our debt, really, are the entitlement programs, in particular Medicare, and to a certain extent Medicaid. With Medicare, we've got to do a lot of things, and we outlined some of those in the Ryan budget, or the Ryan approach. We need to continue to raise the retirement age for Social Security, and for Medicare, we need to do that as well. We've got to go to 67 like we are with Social Security. We also should move to a premium support model. That's not a voucher model, it's a premium support model that actually allows those who are under age 55 to have some hope that the program will be around for them. Under current policy, it won't be, and so we've got to change that.
How will the deficit be covered without significant cuts in those programs, which the Democrats are opposed to, or without some kind of significant increases in revenues, tax revenues, which Republicans are opposed to? How can we do it?
Like I say, we've already, on the tax side, we've already raised the top rate. $650 billion in additional revenue will be coming there. In the context of real tax reform, we'll likely receive or realize additional revenue when you can get rid of exemptions and deductions and loopholes, but not to the extent that the president is talking about. And certainly the Democrats, I think the Republicans have largely gotten over our aversion to additional revenue coming in. The Democrats really need to get over their aversion to dealing with Social Security and Medicare. We absolutely have to. And the president has at times signaled that he's willing to go there, but then he seems to be yanked right back by his base or by other interests. It's got to be done.
What's your reaction to President Obama's gun control suggestions released just recently?
Well, there are elements of that we certainly do need to work on. I've always felt that we ought to have better background checks. The problem in the past has been largely a technological one. If you want to make sure that those who need to protect themselves have access in a timely fashion, and that hasn't been the case, or hasn't been possible in some cases with gun shows and other things. But I think if we can cross the technological hurdle, then we can do a lot better on the background check side. Let's keep in mind that, I think, is where we can make some real progress. There are some other issues, whether it's talking about assault weapons ban or other things that are more cosmetic, if you will, when you look at the assault weapons that are being talked about. I think that they're involved in less than 0.5% of all gun violence. So I think the more important things to do are look at background checks and making sure that those who have weapons have a legal right to have them and should have them.
Any weapon, assault weapons, extended magazines?
Well, like I said, we'll deal with that. When you look at the realities in the Senate and the House, I think you've had Harry Reid, Al Franken, and others come out in the last couple of days saying that they don't believe that will move through the Senate. If you have prominent Democrats like that saying it, then I just don't think that will really be on the table. But there are some measures that we can take.
A recent poll says that 80% of the American people favor background checks in connection with all gun purchases. You mentioned that. What would it take to get us to that point?
Well, I think that's where we really need to do some work and dig in and see. In the past, there have been technological hurdles, as I mentioned. A lot of gun shows take place on a weekend. Do we have the manpower and the resources at the federal level if we want to make sure that people are registered and legal? can we do that and still give people timely access to guns that they feel they need for protection? That's what we need to delve into and look at. And like I said, I think all of us who argue that the best progress that can be made with gun violence is to make sure that criminals don't have guns and don't have access to guns, then that's where we look at.
Finally tonight, Flake spoke about his new role as a senator after his 12 years representing a suburban Phoenix district in the U.S. House of Representatives. Tell me the difference between the Senate and the House. You're just moving from the House to the Senate. What do you see as the differences in the way you'll have to operate?
Well, there's a great divide right in the middle of the rotunda. And having crossed that, it's odd. I still, when I hear or get on my BlackBerry that the House is voting, I still instinctively think I'm missing something. So it's going to take a while to get used to. And one of the biggest things I've realized why it's a 6-year term in the Senate. It takes them about a term to assign you your office. So things move a lot more slowly in the Senate. The procedure is much different. Frankly, for somebody like me with my leanings and my philosophy, I think it's a more comfortable place to be because it allows for more independence. In the House, the rules are really set up to protect the majority. In the Senate, they're set up to protect the individual. And so it's a much different procedure, and I think I like it.
And in the House, you were in the majority. Now you're in the minority. What differences will there be there?
Well, I've been in both in the House. Currently, we're in the majority in the House and going into a pretty substantial minority in the Senate. But the way the Senate rules are set up, somebody in the minority can have probably a lot more leverage than you can in the majority in the House. In the Senate, you have more leverage. So I'm looking forward to that. There is a question about whether the Senate will change the rules, pull the so-called nuclear option, which would basically get rid of the filibuster on the motion to proceed to a bill. I really hope that they don't do that. When Republicans were trying to do something similar a few years ago, I thought that was an awful idea. I think it's an awful idea for the Democrats to try to do it now. And this is an institution that has had rules that date back to the founding, and we shouldn't change those rules like this.
You mentioned the filibuster as one of the unique rules in the Senate. There are a couple of others that people may see as arcane or perhaps even archaic. You can tell us what you think about them. The secret hold on appointments, senators are allowed to do that, and the seniority system, which doesn't necessarily work in your favor, right?
No, it certainly doesn't right now. But with regard to holds, there is a reason for individual senators to be able to object, and that dates back a long time. I think that the secret hold is often abused, though, by both parties. What I'd like to do is, if I have a particular concern about a nominee or policy issue, then I'll let it be known. If there are holds that I place, I intend to make those public. So I think that it can be abused, has been abused, but these rules that allow individuals to have perhaps more power are, on the whole, good.
Tell us what your committee assignments are.
Well, I'll be serving on the Foreign Relations Committee. That follows about 10 years in the House on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm glad for that. Also, the Energy and Environment Committees, or Public Works. Public lands issues obviously are important to Arizona, and that's extremely important that we have a say on energy, power generation issues, forest health policy, mineral extraction, these kind of things. And so that committee will be good for that. I'll also sit on the Judiciary Committee, and obviously in the Senate with the ability to provide advice and consent on nominees. That's extremely important. And obviously immigration moves through the Judiciary Committee, intellectual property issues, and so we're going to be busy.
And what specifically do you see as part of your agenda based on the work in those committees?
Well, with regard to foreign affairs, I'm a big supporter of free trade. I hope that we can enter into some new free trade agreements. Also, I've been quite involved in policy work in Afghanistan. I just returned from Afghanistan, in the Middle East as well. And I want to see that forwarded. I spent a couple of years in Africa. I expect to be on the Africa subcommittee there. And obviously some things are happening in North Africa right now that are a bit dangerous. So there's always a full plate on the foreign policy side. With regard to judiciary, I've been involved obviously in immigration reform in all of my time in the House, and I intend to continue that in the Senate. And obviously with the President saying he's willing and ready to move ahead, we hope that he is, and hope the House and Senate are as well.
Tell us what advice you got from your predecessor, John Kyle.
Well, he said, remember who elected you, and remember to get around. John Kyle did so much good work on the issues that make Arizona, Arizona. We're about 85% publicly owned, with all the public lands issues that bring issues like forest health policy to the fore. Water settlements, he negotiated 7 of them during his time. That's a heavy lift. I just wish he would have finished all of them. but his advice is to get around the state and make sure people know what you're doing, and get a good staff together that understands these issues. And we've certainly done that. And I look forward to trying to forward a lot of the initiatives that he's begun, and put my own individual twist on some things as well.
And Senator John McCain, your colleague and fellow Republican from Arizona, what has he said to you?
Well, I tell you, the longer I'm in Washington, the more respect I have for some of the stands that John McCain has taken over the years, particularly on spending, debt, and deficit. He's stood up time and time again, and let me tell you, it wears on you, either in the House or in the Senate. He's done it for a long time, and his advice is to take some of the same positions I've taken in the House with regard to spending and debt and deficit, and work on those in the Senate, and I hope to do so.
My full unedited interview with Senator Flake is on our website, azweek.com. Next Friday, we'll take a look at the all-important tourism segment of Arizona's economy as the winter visitor season comes to its peak. For Arizona Week, I'm Michael Chihak.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support.